My name is Jo Kukuczka, and I'm from Academic Development Centre at University of Warwick, and that's the United Kingdom, right in the middle of of England. Should I say England? Because I think it's in the middle of both. Anyway, so today it's all about revolutionizing curriculum evaluation with autonomy, and I know it's quite a bold statement, but let's see. It did it for me. I wonder, if it's going to be clear to you as well as we go through it. So for me, basically, it's become this flying bus. Really, that's what it did to me. But let's just see what the context was first of all. So I'm an educational developer, but I'm also an English for academic purposes practitioner. So I'm looking at it here. What I'm sharing here with you today is practice, basically. Some reflections on practice, some intervention that was done in practice here at Warwick about a year ago, maybe 10 months ago. And the context for this talk, what kind of curriculum do I mean when I say curriculum evaluation? What exactly did we evaluate? So this is what it was. In 2022, 2023 academic year, I was asked, when I first started at Warwick, I was asked to co-teach on a PGA postgraduate award, and that's curriculum development in higher education. And then I was asked to ultimately kind of take over, so start evaluating it when it was finished, and then take the lead. So this academic year, is the first year when I'm leading on this program. That program is a 30-credit program for Warwick teaching staff. So anyone who supports teaching and has got any responsibilities, any curriculum design responsibilities, basically, that's the audience for this course. Okay, and please stop me or ask any more questions if that's not clear. But that's the context for this evaluation. So when I say evaluating curriculum, this is the curriculum we evaluated, and I say we because I didn't do it alone. I didn't do it by myself only. So I would say the context for this talk is educational development in the UK, but that wouldn't be completely true because what this curriculum is. So this PGA is curriculum development in higher education, and that's looking at designing curricula across different disciplines, basically. So we've got people from social sciences, we've got people from sciences, we've got people from humanities. So it is educational development plus, or teaching and learning in higher education, I would say, context. And this talk today, like I said, it's practice. It's not a research paper or anything as serious at this point. It's purely reporting what happened in practice and hopefully, seeing where it can go next. So perhaps first starting with typical higher education curriculum evaluation. And I would like to say that this is what it used to be for me before I used this approach that I'm presenting today. And I know from colleagues that, it has been happening for them as well, but I would not want to claim that this is always happening everywhere in higher education. But I think it's fair to say that a typical higher education curriculum evaluation might look like this, and it certainly did for me. So what I would usually go for before was end of module student survey and looking at progression data, and obviously based on that, evaluate curriculum and then redesign, right? Then obviously depending on time, so if I had more time, I would go for hot trends as well, considerations, maybe not a great name, but you know what I mean, it's those things that kind of are on the agenda in a specific academic year. For example, inclusion. This year you could say it's inclusion plus AI, for example, right? So looking at those things while evaluating the curriculum. If there was even more time, I would look at intended learning outcomes and assessment alignment, kind of doing a bit of sense check. So are those still aligned? Do they come together nicely, or perhaps is there any misalignment? And I think, of course, always my professional beliefs and values, what I thought was important in curriculum, it was always somehow guide the evaluation. And then qualitative student feedback, if I had any. So sometimes, depending on the program, in the past, students would come up and they would tell you what they think about the program, right, about the curriculum. And this would then guide sort of informal data that would also guide my typical higher education evaluation. Okay, now what I thought of this was actually that was a problem. Doing it in such a way was a problem. And not to say that there was something wrong with doing it in that way, but there was something missing. I had a feeling that, you know, it was like scratching the surface almost, kind of thing. So it was great to do all of those things. But there was something missing. You know, sometimes you can't put your finger on something. So the problem to me was this. So first of all, I was usually evaluating in the silos, just by myself. And I feel that this leads to single rather than diverse perspectives. And I know I had data from the student, and maybe I would have data from teachers who taught on the module, for example, that I was evaluating. So you might say, well, that's not a single perspective. For me, it is still single perspective because it was still me making that final judgment on the curriculum, making that final decision. Okay, this goes, this stays, and so on. So yes, I had those different data sets from different people, perhaps, but ultimately they were not the decision makers. So that's one problem. Another one, surface level evaluations reveal what I, as a teacher, and what my learners think of the course, but really those evaluations fail to address the fact that we don't know what we don't know. So for example, knowledge building practices myself, I'm looking at myself before I was introduced to LCT, for example. I had no clue, and obviously my students either. So how could I even think of evaluating this if I just don't know what I don't know? Then the next thing, surface level evaluations are primarily concerned with judgment of the extent to which outcomes are met. So we could call it extrinsic evaluation, but they often omit asking explicit questions about the worth of the outcomes themselves. And I thought, right, what, you know, okay, it's fine if the outcomes align with assessment. It's all nice and neat. But I often saw outcomes that I was questioning and thinking, right, are those outcomes even right? You know, is that what we should be aiming for in this program, in this module? And sometimes you would have no power over this. It was just there, and it had to be according, you know, depending on the role I was doing. But then sometimes I could change stuff, and then should I, would I, why, and so on. And then the final thing, and again, that's really just the point coming after getting familiar with theory more, and especially LCT, of course. So thorough and diverse data analysis approaches are often limited in quality and or scope, or just ignored altogether. That was definitely the case for me, and that was the case, you know, for the colleagues that I was talking to about this, in the field of EAP and then in the field of educational development as well. So that was pretty much the problem. And then I thought, okay, now what are the implications? What price are we paying for that problem? So in my case, again, I thought, well, that leads to ineffective curriculum redevelopment for sure, for me. So whatever I'm redesigning and thinking I'm making it better, I am perhaps making it slightly better, but maybe I could do more. And then does this then lead to constrained student success? I would argue that possibly yes, again in my case, but you know, I've got a question mark here because I don't know. It would be interesting to hear what you think about this. So big implications in my head, you know, doing it in such a way that I was doing in my typical evaluation, and then discovering that problem, multi kind of level problem, leads to those things, and that kind of is against everything that I believe in, you know, the very reason I am in higher education, I'm teaching in higher education, because I want my students to succeed ultimately. And even now I am supporting the teachers and the professors in curriculum design, and I don't see their students, but ultimately I am really working I want their students to succeed. So that makes it even a bigger problem in my head right now. And then I started thinking, okay, how about conceptualizing it? Yeah, how about what exactly is this problem, right? And obviously, because I was already familiar with LCT to some extent, you know, those things. So I said, okay, what the problem is actually, uniform evaluation tools. Silo is a problem. Single perspective is a problem. Surface level is a problem. Extrinsic approach, so not looking into the worth of the outcomes themselves, is a problem. And then pretty much looks like obstacles to integrative knowledge building, because then I started putting it together and thinking, right, actually, it looks like this. And again, I'm not sure I got it completely right, but this is what's in my head. So I'm thinking, okay, really, my problem is a problem because it's an obstacle to knowledge building. And it's a problem because we've got essentialism here, we've got knowledge blindness here. And in my head, again, we've got typologizing. And this, all of this makes it a problem. And obviously, once I got to that point, then I thought, right, well, could it be then a solution? Should I just try it out and see what happens, basically? Okay. And this is why autonomy, because autonomy serves to overcome this specific things, as I know from the reading and from conversations with colleagues, right? So why not try that? Okay. And again, not assuming that everyone in the room knows a lot about, I'm not saying I know a lot about autonomy. I've just started experimenting with it, to be honest with you. But this is this is maybe how I'm understanding it
I think
right
it's a really
now.
good idea, Jo. I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes people assume everybody knows all the concepts in LCT, and they don't. We've got loads of concepts in LCT. It's really helpful to hear. And also, it's really helpful to hear what you think they mean as well, because sometimes people assume that we all share the same definitions, and sometimes people have different ideas of what these things mean. So, yeah, please do this. This is great. Don't think,
No,
don't
absolutely.
don't rush through it thinking everyone knows, because they don't.
It's just to kind of also check that whether what I'm thinking is what it is, what it's meant to be. So I think it's a good way to kind of just sense check, right? So again, I've been reading it really slowly, because I think if I read slowly, it helps me as well to kind of make sure that I do understand and I know what I'm actually talking about. And this really, this wow moment of actually understanding it a little bit more happened not that long ago. So, okay, so autonomy explores relations among different sets of practices, such as different forms of knowledge, different disciplines, different educational practices, example, evaluation practices. So I thought, okay, right, if I think autonomy, if I just reread, autonomy explores relations among the different sets of practices, such as evaluation practices, then kind of it becomes relevant to me and my specific problem here that I was trying to address. It conceptualizes insulation between the constituents, positional autonomy, PA, and between how those constituents are related together, relational autonomy, RA. And these concepts come together as autonomy codes. And now here, I have to tell you that this idea of first constituents, can I just simply think of it like, yes, target knowledge or target practice, is that okay? And then the second biggest problem for me was insulation. What is this insulation? What does it actually mean? And then I think I was talking through it with colleagues at ADC in my department who were just kind of getting introduced to autonomy through this draft of this presentation, basically. And we were talking through it, and what is this insulation? It was like, okay, how separate something is from something else. We just thought, please correct me if I'm wrong, but this is how we kind of started understanding it together. So target knowledge. And so I thought, okay, PA would be constituents. So in my case, that would be this practice of evaluation. And then the RA, the relational autonomy, would be purposes. In this case, I just thought if I make it kind of very small, make it more sort of example-led. So as you can see here,
can I just
this is how I translate it.
Jo, and
yeah,
say, like,
yeah.
The hard thing, so when writing about something new, you have like new concepts. You have this, I have a very clear idea of what it is as usually a moving image in my head. And then you try and write it down. And it can be very difficult. It can often take several attempts to make it even understandable to anyone else. And I know that in the first paper back in 2018, I just didn't get it. I just didn't make it really very clear. Nowadays, I would gloss it as contents and purposes. And it's as simple as that. Contents and purposes. I think that's a lot simpler way of thinking about it. And it's pretty much what you've got there, which is like, even constituents becomes a little bit confusing to some people. But I was trying to write it in a way that doesn't lock it onto an object of study, because these concepts have to be able to be used for everything from sound to movement to architecture to contents of a curriculum or whatever. But I just still think that contents, I would now go, and I will when I write the next chapter of the book, for contents and purposes is the nice way of thinking about it. Yeah. And insulation is just how strongly bounded things are from each other, I guess, as you were saying, how strongly bounded one thing is from another, like how separated, how distinguished, how whatever words make sense to you. We're all coming from different parts of the world. We're all speaking in English at the moment, but still those words may have different connotations for people. So it's always a bit difficult with this. But yeah, how strongly bounded or strongly insulated or strongly separated or not these things are. So I think you're right about that. It's contents and purposes is the easiest way I think of it. And one of the things that I'll shut up in a second. But one of the things that I kept thinking of was one of the images in my head were sheep in fields. So how separated different flocks of sheep were from each other in different fields, and then how they were coming together. This is the image that kept coming into my head, was sheep in one field, literally a field, not a Bordurian field, but literally a field, like grass. How separated this field, this flock was from this. They could be in the same field, but how separated they were from each other, and then what arrangements they made. And then I thought of it in all sorts of things, like lights coming together and the patterns they make, things like that, words coming together and the meanings they have, and all this sort of stuff. So it's just the things or whatever it is, and then the patterns they make. That's the way of it. I'm saying that for everybody, but also I'm saying it for myself because I'm going to have to write this chapter soon.
No, that was really helpful, and I thought that you're right. We come from different. So I was thinking, right, maybe it's so hard for me to get it because English is my second language, but
it's so hard to get it because it was so shockingly badly written by the author.
But my friends, the colleagues I was discussing it with were both English, and we were really scratching our heads and thinking, okay, but obviously neither of us, are theorists or very confident about theories and using them and so on, and let alone trying to then teach what you not exactly understand fully. That's another thing. But I just can't wait. The LCT is making such a massive difference to my own practice, and I'm just trying, and failing or trying and succeeding to slowly teach it to people and kind of get them on board, at least, so they are introduced to it and then they make their own decisions. But if I explain it badly in that context of teaching and learning higher education in the UK especially, then some people might just say, okay, I don't care. So there is no pressure, right? Okay, so constituents or content.
Can I just add something about when I'm thinking about this? I keep getting confused about all of these things, and I sort of stop and think, and that discussion just helped. One thing that I kept getting struggled about is what exactly is being insulated on this diagram. So Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically as you go up and down the content PA axis, you're basically saying things are further apart, they're more insulated when they in different positions in terms of content. So the contents could be insulated, i.e. a long way apart, or not insulated, close together, but also the purposes could be separately a long way apart or close together. And that thing that the insulation kind of works separately is something I keep it fades out in my head and then comes back into focus. But just verbalizing that myself helps me kind of get my head around what exactly is being insulated or not, that it's all about.
So can I ask, is the insulation and the different axes there, is it more insulated further apart if it's on the plus side of the axis, and less insulated or closer together if it's on the minus side, or is it the other way around?
Plus a stronger insulation, stronger boundaries, stronger control.
So further apart, stronger boundaries.
Yeah, whatever metaphor works for you. So separation, insulation, stronger bounding and control. You know, all of this. Dominic's asked if it's similar to Bernstein's concepts. Actually, yeah, it comes from like it's a basic way of thinking about things in terms of boundaries and strength of boundaries between things. Yeah, so it's like it basically says we can have stronger boundaries or weaker boundaries, stronger being plus, weaker being minus. That's just conventional annotation. And as Paul was saying, and we can think about it being, right, what's being insulated or what's being kept apart, what's being separated or integrated? Is it the contents or is it the ways they're being arranged, or purposes, if you like? So it's just taking the idea of boundaries or insulation or separateness or whatever, how separate or how integrated something is, and then saying, well, what is it that's being integrated or separated? Is it the things themselves, or is it the ways of arranging things? Is it the contents or is it the purposes? And when you realize that those things can, as Paul was saying, can actually have different values, then you start seeing things you wouldn't normally see. So I'm sorry, I'll let Jo take back over in a second, but I just wanted to clarify this, which is you wouldn't see, if you didn't separate those things, you wouldn't see introjected codes where you're taking something from outside and turning it to a purpose within. And you wouldn't see projected codes where you take stuff from here and use it for some other purpose. So that's why we separate those two things.
Thank you.
Somebody asked a question.
Linda, did you want to say something? No, okay. Yeah, this is really, really helpful to kind of talk it through. So we would say, yeah, PA plus RA plus is where those things are very separate from everywhere else, you know, I think. So internal, so you can see the little kind of squares there. So PA plus, RA plus, internal constituents, so internal contents for internal purposes, right? And then the opposite exotic would be RA minus, PA minus, external constituents for external. So different, separate from what's in sovereign and so on. Yeah, I'm gonna just leave it here, I think, because then I'm gonna go down the rabbit hole. Okay. I'm gonna move on from this one. Back to my context of sort of curriculum evaluation. Now I thought, okay, I know this about autonomy, or I think I know this about autonomy, and that's how I understand it. How does this help here exactly? So I always think of theory, especially LCT, as this toolkit, toolbox. Obviously, toolkit is used in literature as well, obviously, but yeah, tools, right? And how can I then use them to fix my problem, or how does it help with my problem, if it can at all? And then I started thinking about those pathways, and I was thinking about time, because obviously evaluation practice is something that happens over time. You do something first, and then you do something after, and then you do something after that, and then there is the result, or you do stuff before. So time is a massive thing to kind of think about when I think about evaluating curriculum. And then this is where I thought, okay, the power of autonomy tools, really, because what happens here is those pathways. So analyzing the pathways traced by the shifting autonomy code through time is proving valuable for understanding how different kinds of knowledge are brought together. So we're thinking, okay, different kinds of knowledge. So perhaps those internal constituents for external purposes, and then we can have external constituents for external purposes. All of those different kinds of knowledge are brought together, and depending on the way they brought together, they either enable, they can enable, they can constrain integrative knowledge building. So I was back to thinking of my students, or my participant students. It's really, really important to enable, to do it in such a way that it can enable knowledge building rather than constrain. Or if it constrains, I want to see what exactly is the problem, how exactly does it do it, so then I can try and solve it. So here, key to bringing together those diverse knowledges is the notion of autonomy tours. That's my understanding of it. Please correct me if I'm wrong with this. And then by tracing shifts in autonomy codes along different pathways, autonomy tours bring together and then repurpose. And that's the magic word, I think, for me, and I'll share what I mean by this bit later, or will it become clear later. Repurpose. So they not only bring together, but also repurpose diverse forms of knowledge. And then by doing so, they enable integrative knowledge building. So I thought, bingo, right? This is exactly what I need. And this is exactly what's needed to support effective curriculum evaluations. And this can take shape through engagement of extrinsic and intrinsic evaluation approaches, in-depth theory and research-driven data analysis, and collaborative evaluation. So I thought, okay, I need an autonomy tour and see what happens. And this is perhaps how it can look like for me, okay?
Jo,
So
can I
then
just ask
theory
a quick
into-
question?
Sure.
So I just wondered, on your diagram there, why do your tours miss out exotic code?
Oh, this is just an example. This is a slide put in,
Okay,
to 20 seconds. Sorry, it might be, those arrows that you see there. It's just an example of a tour to, I think it's a slide from another talk that I did for teachers. Sorry, Steve. Yeah. So I'll show what I did specifically in a moment. So theory into practice. Now, this understanding of autonomy and specifically autonomy tour, how can I then use it in practice? So I thought, okay, what's my solution strategy, right? First, I decided let's analyze the problem, okay? So let's use autonomy plane to plot my typical evaluation practices there and see what happens and where it is. Is there a tour? Is there no tour? And so on. Step 2, intervention design. So I plan and I plot what I thought would be a tour onto the plane. Then I would run the intervention. And the key here to success was to do it collaboratively. So I was very, very lucky because participants from that pilot PGA were very, very keen to take part in the evaluation. So we did co-evaluation, and also the previous lead was also very keen to take part in that evaluation, and another colleague. So I had 12 people involved in this, that they had no clue that I was trying to do autonomy and autonomy tour. We just did it together and they just followed. And I'll tell you what they shared and what they thought about the approach later on. But the key was to kind of avoid that single perspective and get different people to kind of look at stuff and evaluate stuff. And then step 4, reflection. So I thought, okay, I'm going to then take time and critically reflect on what happened, how this approach worked for me. Did it achieve the purpose and so on? And step 5, the implications. So then I had to redesign the course, or maybe I would arrive at the decision that we would arrive at the decision that it didn't need, redesigning, and it was fine. It wasn't, of course, but that was the plan. So that was the strategy. So I designed it in a specific way, and I'll share that in a sec. And I just want to say that how I designed the intervention, that's how actually it was delivered. Exactly, because obviously I was the one designing it and I was the one running it then ultimately. So there were no sort of discrepancies between the design and the actual practice. which is not always the case when we design. So how I used autonomy, and again, we you know this one already. This one may be a little bit clearer, and this is really basic translation. I'm not sure if I can call it translation device because I don't have anything else, but this is how I was kind of thinking again. So what is sovereign to me? What is exotic to me? What is projected to me? So I basically thought, okay, if I think that sovereign would be knowledge of curriculum evaluation, so this is the content, the constituent, for the purpose of effective curriculum development. That's my purpose, that's my target. That's how I started. Okay, what is exactly the target? What am I trying to achieve? So knowledge of curriculum evaluation, or we could just make it short and say evaluation, curriculum evaluation, for the purpose of effective curriculum development, no other purpose. Effective curriculum development. And then, of course, in other codes, we would have in exotic other knowledges separate from knowledge of curriculum evaluation for other purposes, separate from the purposes of effective curriculum development as it was in the target. And then in projected, we've got knowledge of curriculum evaluation for other purposes. And then in introjected, we would have other knowledges for the purpose of effective curriculum development. And I'll give you an example of sort of activity that I then put into those different places. Are you with me so far? Yeah, okay. So first, problem analysis. I plotted my typical series of evaluation activities, and no surprise there. I just realized, or I just thought, okay, actually, single perspective evaluation of surface level data. So the things I would typically do and my colleagues would typically do, progression data, student evaluation of the learning, pedagogical challenge. For me, they all sat neatly in sovereign codes. So knowledge of curriculum evaluation for the purpose of curriculum redevelopment. And this kind of confirmed to me, right, this is why I have this problem, right, in the first place. It's just all sitting there. And like I said before, nothing wrong with this approach at all, but it can't be it. It can't be just that. It can't be just the only things that we do when we evaluate the curricula. So then moving on to the intervention design, and then as how we run it, I thought, okay, so if I want to start first with sovereign codes, I need to start at home with the target. So let's start with the activity of explicit aim. So just establishing in the group, establishing what exactly is the aim here. We are evaluating curriculum for the purpose of effective curriculum redevelopment that enables student success. To kind of making sure that everybody is on board and everybody who's co-evaluating understands that this is exactly what we're doing. So I thought, okay, this looks like it fits in the sovereign codes. Second thing, I really, really wanted, I don't know why, but I just really wanted to travel to the exotic. And I designed this icebreaker, talent in the room. So what we did here in that second activity, shifting the code from sovereign to exotic, was something obviously that was separate from the evaluation for the purpose of redevelopment. Because what we did was this. I basically took this approach, psychological approach from somewhere. I found this somewhere, and just people who were in the room, let's think about 4 quadrants of thinking. You know, what kind of thinker are you, right? And it was the purpose of this work, kind of, okay, what we will be looking at different things during the intervention. Where are your strengths? You know, what can you help with most, and so on. So that's what we did in that activity. Then we moved to projected. So target knowledge, but non-target purpose. And I was thinking, okay, what can we do here? And actually, is that right? So if I say conceptualizing, so let's, before we even start evaluating, let's think, what is evaluation? what is evaluation process itself and how it fits within the bigger picture of the curriculum development process as a whole. So before we even start evaluating this specific curriculum for the purpose of redesigning it, do we understand evaluation? Are we on the same page with the understanding of what evaluation actually is? So what we did here,
can I just say can you just go back a step? I just say that one of the really good things about going left on the plane, so going to to other purposes, let's say, non-target purposes, and going to those left codes, both of them. So one of the great things about that is that they are spaces in which you can get everyone up to speed about, like, what are we doing? Because if you're talking about what we're doing, for example, you're not actually doing it, so it is non-target purposes, but you're often bringing that content together and saying, okay, what is it that we're discussing right now? How are we going to go about doing this? So the classic example in the Autonomy Tours paper from 2018 is when a teacher goes off and teaches maths in a maths kind of way, because she needs everybody to understand how graphing of variables works in order to then use it in a science classroom for scientific data, which kind of goes off, those moments when you kind of go, what are we doing? Or let's get everyone on the same page. So that's what really, that movement over that way, whatever way it is for you guys to be going towards non-target, can often be in teaching those moments when you are kind of going, not always, but it can be those moments where you go, hey, let's all get on the same page about something. You know what I mean? It's not the only reason you go that way, but you've given a really classic example of that with number 3, and also you've shown that sometimes when I first started talking about this, particularly with colleagues in educational linguistics, in particular colleagues in educational linguistics, they were always saying, oh, so you want to be in the sovereign code all the time? And I was like, no, you don't. Because if you do that, you're going to be extraordinarily boring. So going over and doing something like an icebreaker or something engaging in the exotic code will be really important, because people are people. They're not, just information machines. So you do need to do things other than teaching something. Sometimes you need to engage people, you know what I mean? So I think you're just showing really nicely that there are valuable purposes to going all over the plane and not just being stuck in I must hit my target for target purposes sort of thing.
Yeah,
Jo,
you know what I thought? Yeah, sure.
Go on, sorry, react first.
Oh, yeah, I forgot now. I know. Yes. When I was inviting the co-evaluators to join me, obviously, right? And like I said, they did it for free in their own time, and it was just amazing how I was really, really lucky. But anyway, I said to them, look, we are going for an innovative approach. We're going for an evaluation that you probably haven't done before. If you have, please let me know. But I also asked them to critique it as we were doing this. So I said, okay, you are all teachers in different disciplines. We had a philosopher, we had somebody from politics, we had an engineer, all sorts. And I said, if at any point this intervention does not make sense to you, if you at any point need to stop and think, okay, yeah, but why am I spending time on this now, right? Let me know. And was very interesting that nobody did. It made sense to them to do this icebreaker, this specific one. And it was all connected to them, clearly from what they've been saying to me later. So, yeah, sorry, Stevia, go on.
No, so I was interested in the relationship between using the autonomy plane to plan the intervention and the stages in the design of the session. So did you think what you wanted the stages of the session to be and then plot them on the plane, or did the visual analytic itself help you think about the kinds of activities and moves you wanted to make? Do you see what I mean? Was there a dialogue between autonomy and your planning, which meant that the planning was actually shaped by the tool, or was your plane simply recording the thoughts that you already had?
You know what? I don't know. I think it blurred, so I knew that I wanted explicit aim, and I knew that I wanted to talk about, what evaluation is for sure. But I think the icebreaker came in just because simply I saw the autonomy plane and I really wanted to go into the exotic codes. I was thinking, okay, what can it be? So I guess both, if that answers your question. And then later on, when we went into interjected, I'll show it in a minute. And maybe also, I think how I did this number 3. So I knew I wanted to talk about what evaluation is, but then eventually how we did it in this way, that was because I was thinking, okay, it has to be non-target purpose. I have to really focus on target knowledge and non-target purpose. So I think it got really blurred.
And you might be going there, but am I right in thinking that you used this as a backstage planning tool and didn't actually use this front of house and kind of show people what you'd done?
I didn't show them anything of this. Well, this were just slides, obviously, right? They just saw activities, and like I said, I invited feedback, but I'm about to share it with them, hopefully this summer, and we'll see what they say. But when we have a big reveal, but first I'll run it, past you, and just to see if that makes sense, actually, for everyone from the theory point of view. Okay, so with the yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry, Jo, and my apologies. I had to step out just for a moment there, so this may have already been said, but I just wanted to observe that seeing someone use the exotic code, I think, is very useful, because I was thinking sort of how I've redone things, and sort of I've done training sessions where I've deliberately essentially tried to induce discomfort on the part of a whole lot of people in the room in order to try and get them into a different space that's both mutual but also outside of their regular way of thinking. And I think seeing you do it deliberately on this diagram actually will sort of potentially lead us to a really useful planning device when we might be wanting to sort of rethink certain things, that showing the use of the exotic as a very deliberate strategy. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that was a risk, and I know maybe not a lot, but some academics really do not like icebreakers because they think, oh, it's just time wasters. And yeah, it's an interesting point. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Sharon. So anyway, for just whizzing through.
I hate them with a vengeance.
You see, and now you've got, okay, well, let's see if we've got any evidence to kind of put them in. Anyway, so evaluation, yes, I think you know what I mean. So what is evaluation? Where does it fit in the bigger picture of curriculum development? When we think of curriculum development as being the design part, and then the evaluation part being also part of development. It's all, it never ends, basically. So that's what we talked about in that point, in that point 3. And then we went to analysis. We went down to interjected codes. So, okay, for the target purpose, but not non-target knowledge, in the sense that, again, in the past, people would be just jumping into evaluation, jumping into judgment. And what I really, really wanted us to do is to, with kind of reserve judgment for later, and let's just analyze what we've got. And this activity was the longest one. And again, I don't know how much it matters or doesn't matter. So activity number 1, Number 1 was obviously super short, right? And number 2 was perhaps 10-15 minutes. Similarly, activity number 3. And then in that number 4, in the introduction, I think we spent a good few hours, actually. That was the biggest part. So if I was to kind of put dots or make the, I don't know, like blobs, how long we spent somewhere, maybe that would be also interesting. But just to tell you, this is what we did there. So collaborative, so we did it together, data analysis activity, including considerations of different stakeholders, application of diverse analytical lenses. So everything I felt was missing, I was trying to put in there, and then obviously it was making sense for everyone because we knew why we were doing. So ultimately we were going into judgment, and this was for the purpose of curriculum redevelopment. People could see it very clearly. So what we did here, I'm just checking on time. Okay. we started with, okay, what we need to know and why. And we went for the usual things, you know, mapping stakeholders, who's really, who matters, whose needs, expectations matter. So first and foremost, the learners, but then obviously we asked, okay, what about all of those other stakeholders, right? Employers, society, education for sustainable development, I don't know, institution, AI, anything else. And then people were coming up with the ideas, and then we had that table, we need to know. I devised it and I said, okay, we need to know this, and that. And then people again were adding things, but I really wanted us to go deeper. So why do we need to know that? Because, and we were kind of feeling that, you know, having conversations about why do we need to know that? Because, but, and then trying to find perhaps limitations in whatever it is that we need to know. Can we actually find out to what extent, and so on. And then that thing you can see in the top left corner, what do we know? Again, just acknowledge, what do we know? So we know what the course aims are, we know what the ILOs are, we know what the assessment is, learning activities, we know the platforms, format, it was all delivered online. We know how people were attending, who dropped out, not maybe who dropped out, but how many people dropped out, how they engaged, and all of those things. And then we were thinking, okay, what else do we know, as opposed to what we need to know apart from that. So going slightly deeper there. And we also, second part of this was selecting lenses. Okay, so what is it exactly? So we know the curriculum, we know what people were saying, we've got students' data. Through what lens would we want to look at it? And we kind of, so I thought of those, and again asked people, do you have any other lenses that you would want to explore? But this is what I came up with when I was designing this intervention. So institutional lenses, so the strategy, the education strategy, what's in it? Do we want to look through that lens? Is it important? Societal lenses, people were really interested in sort of looking at that curriculum from the SDG sustainability point of view, because people were saying, oh, there was nothing, there was a claim in the ILO that, you know, it's going to be inclusive, but then there was absolutely no mention, we didn't go into, and so on. Learner lenses, so what participants said in the feedback surveys and feedback interviews as well we had. So we had a lot of data really from the learners, not only people who attended co-evaluation, but also other people. Knowledge lenses, and again, I risked it a bit because we went into it. Constructive alignment is fairly sort of well known in my institution. Principles of learning, we just printed them out, and again, you know, and we were also trying to be critical. So should we look through constructive alignment? But do you agree with it? Do you disagree? What do you think? Has this approach got limitations? And then really briefly, you can see cumulative knowledge building that I just went for it and decided to very briefly introduce the waves, and like 5 minutes basically, let's see if it waves. So the previous course lead applied the waves, for example, analyzed the pilot curriculum through that. Does it wave? Is that wave connected? Is it? And what he discovered was really interesting was this, how do we call it? That downward escalator, it's called. Yeah. So he said, oh my God, you know, it's not connected. And then we went back to the students' feedback saying, oh, students were saying that it was making sense to some point, and then there was this massive jump and they did not understand. So yeah, a lot of things started making sense, but I was very clear, let's try not to jump into any conclusions. Let's try not to judge anything at this point. Let's just try to analyze and see what happens. And then other lenses, people wanted to look through the disciplinary lenses, or perhaps sector-wide. Some people wanted to think of AI. So that's what we did in this part. So then people were picking their lenses. Some people worked individually, some people worked in pairs. So they picked whichever lens they wanted to look at, or 2 lenses, some of them, and then justify your choice. I really wanted them to be explicit about why they wanted to look through a specific lens, and then get to work. So analyze whatever we knew through, you know, using the lens or lenses that they picked. So this is what happened in point 4, so in our introjected codes. So non-target knowledge for target purpose. And then I wanted to really go home. I really wanted to bring it home to sovereign codes, and thought, okay, so this is now where we actually take it all together and we evaluate. So we do judge, we say what is good, why, what is bad, what should stay, what should go, what wasn't there at all, and should be there, and so on. That one was fairly long as well, but not as long as number 4, if that makes sense. So this is what happened ultimately. This was my, you could say, lesson plan, and this is exactly, like I said, this is exactly how it was run and how it happened. Like I said before, nobody stopped me at any point saying, it doesn't make sense, why are we doing this? They said it kind of followed, you know, in their heads. Now the implications. So, like I said, I did my critical reflections, you know, sat back, you know, after, and thought, right, what happened here, right? So first of all, I was really, really pleased because I thought I achieved what I wanted to achieve. So it really helped me to go deeper, venture under the surface of my curriculum and better understand what is going on there and why. And that then led, I felt, to more effective curriculum evaluation. So I had more to judge, and then that judgment was more informed, I felt, compared to what I was doing before. I'm not saying it was perfect. It was simply more effective in my head. A practical thing here, the entire experiment took less time than anticipated. We did it over 2 sessions. Obviously, my preparation was you know, coming up with this, but then the actual intervention was 5 or 6 hours. I can't remember now, over two different days. So obviously 5 to 6 hours of all of those people. But I think in the past, I would think if anything more than I typically do would take awfully long. I don't know, like a week. Which it didn't. I think the wow moment for me was when I realized that it took me well beyond my target. And this is going back to, you know, bringing together, autonomy brings together those different forms of knowledge, but also does this repurposing. And this is when the magic happened for me, because I thought, okay, it took me to my target. So I achieved, I think, what I wanted to achieve, but I also went beyond, because really it went into a shift in my thinking about curriculum itself and evaluation of that curriculum as well, but also evaluation just broadly on its own. And yeah, the final thing, there's no going back. So I'm going to do it again. Hopefully I'll have some volunteers. But yeah, so that was my critical reflection. And then we did, and I also got feedback from the co-evaluator. So first, kind of at the end of that second session, we sat down and so we shared, you know, what we thought there and then. But then I also spoke to them individually, you know, so we would have some privacy, and people would say what they really thought about the whole experiment, the whole intervention. So very similar actually to what I was thinking. That was quite surprising, and that came out, you know, in the group evaluation, but also in those individual, in the group sharing feedback, and then in the individual feedback as well. So they just, that's the exact words they use. So enlightening, more enlightening than the usual analysis of student feedback. That's what it gave them. They really liked spending ample time on meaningful multi-lens and multi-stakeholder analysis, while, you know, remembering how it all connects or disconnects with each other, and this overarching purpose of evaluation, what exactly it is. So that, you know, projected codes, what exactly is it that we're doing, and why are we doing it, right? Not necessarily always connected. So they really like this in-depth judgment of outcomes, practices, and the effectiveness of the curriculum as a whole. And what I say here in that second point, it really became very, very clear that it profoundly impacted the co-evaluators themselves. Again, taking the very purpose of this evaluation beyond the judgment, beyond the informed judgment of this curriculum, but also into integrative knowledge building of its co-evaluators, because they said, wow. So the target for us, and I remind you, the target for us was to evaluate curriculum for the purpose of effective redevelopment of that PGA. But then they said, right, but I can use this approach as well for my own evaluations of my own curricula, number one. And also, now I'm thinking about evaluation and how I did it and how much more this analysis and those different things that we did, how much it gave me. It was worth every minute. You know, they said, oh, maybe actually I'm wasting much more time doing it the quick way because I think I'm saving time and I don't have the time. But actually, I am kind of able to see so much more and therefore, you know, redevelop my curriculum better, basically. So at that time, many reporters planning to use or already using. So obviously, then like I said, when I spoke to them individually, that was maybe a month, you know, after doing the co-evaluation. So they said, "Oh, I've actually started already looking. Oh, well, now I'm thinking of it. I'm thinking, right, let's go through the waves, for example. I don't know. Let's go through the lens of the strategy, or let's look at the worth of my own ILOs and so on." So that's what they said. And now I think the final thing, curriculum redesign, to just give you a glimpse of what was the final result of all of this. So the program we're evaluating, 22-23, the pilot, that program was based mainly on design thinking kind of approach to curriculum design. There were 8 ILOs, and we discovered some misalignment with assessment and curriculum design. So some of the ILOs were, people said, not connected to curriculum design, actually. Something else. There was something else. Was it necessary? Just looking at that in the analysis, and not all of the ILOs were even assessed through the assessment. There was a single piece of assessment, written assessment, reflection on curriculum design portfolio. All of that was delivered online before, and as we discovered during the analysis, it was not waving, or it was waving, but that wave was broken in several places, which then corroborated with the participants' feedback, like we said, that, oh, I didn't connect to me. This is why then I struggled, or some people dropped out because they could just not catch up and they could not carry on with it. Basically, it was too much. And then the redesigned program, which is running right now, actually. So yeah, let's just see what happens. What it is now is based on curriculum design as a social practice. So we went broader and deeper. Let's start. Design thinking is just one kind of tool that might be useful for some initial ideas in relation to curriculum design, but it can't be the only thing, and it can't be just, and there isn't much evidence that actually it works in curriculum design contexts anyway. So let's look at curriculum design as a social practice, bringing in all of the considerations that need to be made, that, you know, knowledge is powerful, and who's got this knowledge, who makes decisions, who does it impact, and so on. So it's a little bit like a Pandora box. But this is what we did. We replaced 8 ILOs with 4 ILOs and made sure that all of them align. They are aligned with theory. We said, okay, curriculum design has to be theory and evidence informed. It can't be, you know, I'm designing this and that because I feel like it. No, it's worked for me. But actually, what does the literature say? Is there any theoretical underpinnings? Make it stronger, basically. Make sure that students actually do learn that curriculum. They can build knowledge. We've got 2 assessments now. One is peer dialogue to critique design drafts, and then another one is still design portfolio, but now it's not a reflection on the design process. It's more the actual design scheme of work that is rationalized. So, okay, my ILOs are this and that because my assessment is this and that, because the literature, because my discipline, because knowledge building practices, and so on. So we went in that direction. And then how does it all sit within understanding curriculum design as a social practice? Now it's the delivery is blended, and there are co-creation opportunities to some of the participants. They've got different expertise areas that they share with us. Sometimes they just have an optional session that they run on, I don't know, autonomous assessment, for example. So things we do not cover on the curriculum, but they come and share. Blended delivery means there are 4 mandatory seminars, which are sort of half-day seminars, and then everything else is happening online, synchronously or asynchronously, so more kind of open opportunities there. And now the curriculum waves as well. So the actual program waves, and that wave is connected. And we just actually did a session on designing waving curriculum, designing, semantically waving curriculum using semantic gravity. And we have analyzed our own curriculum on that program with the new participants, and we have discovered that it does indeed wave. So that's all very positive. But like I said, co-evaluation of this one now is coming up. So we shall see. So what I would really welcome any critique, any thoughts on this approach. Yeah. Do you think it can work? Could we adapt it further? Do you think it could work in your context? Anything would be really, really helpful. I'm planning to use this approach to develop a pilot curriculum evaluation course. So in addition to the design PGA, either a small module or something to do with evaluating curriculum. And I specifically I'm dying to use autonomy tools to do it, and then make it explicit as well. So go through the process, but then also make people aware and to kind of introduce the tool, the theory to them and how it works. I think that's that. References, yeah, not many. And then acknowledgements, massive thanks to my ADC colleagues and the alumni of the program who, like I said, gave their time to sit with me and go through this intervention. Massive thanks to Susie. She's not here today, but she gave me feedback on the draft of this presentation, and she really, walked through autonomy tours with me as well. And then LCT community at LCT 5, never-ending source of inspiration, obviously now being here now. And that's it from me, I think. Yes. Should I stop sharing?
No, I'd leave it up, Jo.
Okay.
And, thanks so much for that. And people just jump in or put your hand up or whatever and so on. Yeah, thanks, Linda. Let's have a kind of silent clap thing on for that. So far, thank you. And because people will drop out as they go sometimes. But let's anything at all, jump in and say whatever you want.
Hello, Jo.
Hello. Great to see you again.
Yeah. So I was thinking in the present slide, when you move on to the second slide, you want to break the ice. So at that step, what when you're teaching something else, what do you have in your mind? How, in what way, or how can you decide what you teach at the second step? I mean.
Oh yeah, how can you decide?
You have a
That
lot
took
to
me.
teach. Yeah.
Yeah, that took me a while, if I find it. That took me a while to actually decide, yeah, what I should do there. So it makes so it's not, I don't know, which cut are you or something, It was tricky, but I thought, I was thinking along the lines of that I'm going to have those people in the room, how can I, and I obviously I knew them because they were participants on the course, but you only know people to some extent. And now they were asked to kind of almost shift, who they were from participants to co-evaluators, somebody on the other side almost. So you're putting a different hat on, I don't know. And I was thinking about this hat, I think actually, the idea of hats. And then, okay, hats in terms of personalities. And I thought, okay, how about, and this was 4 quadrants of thinking. I listened to those blinks, those audiobooks. I've got like an app, and it just summarizes different nonfiction books for you. And I was listening at that time a lot on different books on thinking, how we might think different. I'm not saying I'm not an expert, so obviously I have no clue, and some of those books might not be very credible, for example, but it got me thinking about thinking. So for example, I don't know, I see my strengths, and I'm quite, I think, or maybe I would like to be quite analytical. but at the same time, I like steps almost, at least to get me understand something. And I would like to think that I think creatively, but I don't think it's the case, you know, necessarily. I think more analytical. And I thought, okay, well, what does it tell me and people, and how can I then use it in any intervention? So I'm trying to co-evaluate something, for example. What does it matter, right? I don't know if that's answering your question, Rentaro. Is it?
Yes, because I was thinking that
roughly?
if I were you, I might teach something else as long as it served the purpose of ice breaking. Yeah.
What would you do? What did you have in mind?
Well, I think we may have some kind of game or something else because yeah, anything that can help us, you know, break the ice here. I think you give everyone something about teaching that is good. But I might try something else like doing some kind of game or anything else. I have no clear idea, but I just want to know why you have chosen this as your
I didn't have much time to think of this, so basically the first or second thing that came to mind, we put it on this 4 quadrants of thinking that was plastered on the wall, because we were lucky to do it in person as well, this co-evaluation. So it was plastered on the wall. Oh no, we had some people on hybrid. It was, anyway, most people were in the room. We put it on the wall, and we had different kind of colors of post-it notes. And we just talked about those different. First, we kind of people critiqued, oh, do you agree with this? Do you think this is actually what it is, 4 quadrants of thinking? Would you agree that you fit into one neatly, or would you say that actually, and then we said, actually, no, I'm a bit of this and I think so. What we went for in the end was, I think I'm 30% analytical thinker and 70% procedural thinker, right? Or people would say, actually, I'm 25% everywhere. I feel I'm all over the place. So we just had this colorful kind of wall trying to kind of see, and then it looked like, you know, most of us in the room felt, you know, they were innovators. We had, you know, that color, whatever color that was, I can't remember, blue, was kind of prevalent. I said, okay, let's see how that helps with what we are doing today, basically. But it will be really interesting. So if you come up with an idea what game you would do, if you could, let me know whenever, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I've got a thought on this. Actually, autonomy possibly helps with, I don't know, but there were 2 kinds of icebreakers I can think of. So there's the one that in the chat about making you do a Kate Bush dance versus this, which is about, in some sense, the kind of things you're about to do. So I had somebody made me do an icebreaker that involved standing on chairs and walking trying to swap places with everybody on the chairs, which was totally embarrassing and absolutely nothing to do with what we ultimately did. And that feels like it's sort of in the Kate Bush dancing kind of thing, if this was the purpose. But what you've done is actually does have a purpose related to the whole activity, in a sense. It's not totally unrelated, and afterwards you can see that might have been useful because you're doing a task where people are finding out important things for the task about other people in the room. So it's almost, you could take that exotic quadrant and split it into the 4, and there's a difference between being in the outer reaches of the quadrant versus being up near the axis. And what you were doing feels to me like it's up near the axis. And you could, instead of just thinking of the exotic quadrant of being everything else, it could have an inner layer of things related to thinking in this case, or related to group working, because that's perhaps also what it's about. And
how to collaborate better, I guess. That was maybe what I was thinking.
And so you're actually, autonomy could kind of give you a way of thinking about that. Is there something that is closer to purpose rather than totally different? Because the ones that I find I hate are the ones that I can't see any reason why we did that other than to embarrass me and force me to talk to people I don't want
Yeah,
to talk to.
same. Yeah.
Whereas if you give me a reason to talk to people, I love talking to people when I've got a purpose for talking to them. So there's something about purpose of icebreakers in there that maybe autonomy tells you something about. I don't know, but it just feels like
there might be a litmus test for that, in the sense that at the end of your session, could you return to that task and have them reflect on it and have it be useful? So so sorry, Sharon, to kind of use your Kate Bush example again. But if you were to do a Kate Bush dance, and then at the end of your session come back to the Kate Bush dance and reflect on the usefulness of the Kate Bush dance in terms of the session, you wouldn't get anywhere. But in terms of your exotic code activity, you could quite easily come back to that task right at the end of your session and say, okay, guys, so at the beginning, remember, most people felt that they were innovators. So do you still think that? Like let's take 2 minutes, go to the wall. Would you actually move any of your post-its to different places now? Do you still think of yourself as an innovator, or might that have gone elsewhere? So I suppose technically that might have taken the session a little bit off purpose in terms of where you wanted to end up, but you could come back to that exotic code. So as Paul's saying, you could come back to that in terms of original purpose. So there is a kind of hidden target of sorts in there about collaboration and so on, and it wouldn't be irrelevant to come back to that.
which actually it is all about purpose, because the Kate Bush dance could have a purpose, and you have a clear idea of what that purpose is, and it could actually relate to things. It depends what the actual ultimate lesson was about.
And just
you've got to think about what you're targeting. Sorry.
And just without derailing it all into Kate Bush, there was a purpose, in fact, because it was actually about getting a whole group of people to learn something that I knew none of them had expertise in, and actually teach them the way in which we had been teaching our students, and give them feedback in the way we had been giving feedback to our students, and then basically say, how does this make you feel, and can we rethink this better? And we actually rewrote the way in which we gave feedback to students as a result of that, and ultimately put in place a new policy around some student feedback stuff as well. So it did actually return to home in terms of, but you're right in terms of saying the hidden target, and that, like, even hearing you articulate that helps me think about that sort of activity.
So autonomy,
it's really interesting.
Talk about icebreakers. What makes a good icebreaker?
And I'm thinking, because I was thinking of this one, actually, this one, if I was, I don't know, thinking of dots or house, where is it in that quadrant, right? I thought it would be pretty close to the middle, like you said, but like I said, that was taking the risk, and I really wanted people to see the purpose, see the connection, which they did, even if vague, and do it, and do it sort of well. And now I forgot what I wanted to say. Oh my God. Never mind. Oh yes, taking exotic being as the purpose, or target being as taking outside of your comfort zone. This being purpose in itself. I don't know.
I mean, sometimes it
wasn't. Sorry, it wasn't quite enough.
Sometimes the shift to the exotic code is kind of like it's often deliberately to do something completely different that's unrelated, right? If students are clearly unhappy, if they're unengaged, if they're not following, if they're tired, it's the end of the day, it's too hot, you might end up doing an icebreaker in the exotic code that deliberately has nothing to do with anything, because you just want them doing something else, getting up, moving, in order to hopefully then have the headspace to re-engage. I think we ended up doing this at LCT5, didn't we? There were various conversations in different talks about the importance of the exotic code and going there for different purposes in different educational contexts.
In Sharon's presentation, I think maybe.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been thinking about the exotic code as something different in the autonomy stuff I was doing, which is the magic versus the computer science. In a sense, the exotic code there I'm using with a very definite purpose, and its purpose is to give me links that then go into the projected or introjected. So it's a sort of starting point for a route back into computer science, because I'm seeing the two things are equivalent, but it's serving the same kind of thing. I mean, Carl said it's about enthusing sometimes, or giving people a break, and that's partly what it's doing when I'm doing, I mean, not just magic, but when I do other similar things, you're doing activities. I do have a purpose, but it's a hidden purpose, and all is revealed, and at the end you ought to understand that there really was a purpose. So I don't know whether that, I'm starting to wonder, is that really exotic, or is it one of the other places?
No, that's definitely.
Oh.
We remember that the non-target is always a miscellaneous and everything else category.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like you've got your target, and then there's everything else, and people often mistake that the non-target contents, the non-target purposes, is everything else there, and it could be all kinds of things. And as we get more and more studies of autonomy pathways, we'll find that we'll begin to understand that the purposes and the contents that we go to will change what happens. You know, as you say, you've got you kind of like, you're doing something, and then later you'll reveal that it's all connected. You know, sometimes people will go in there and there's no sense of what the hell it's for. That's the sort of icebreaker that I hate, is that you go in there and it's non-target purpose, but for me it's no bloody purpose at all, because I can't see the point of it. And I wouldn't mind if I'd been told up front, you know, so like, oh, this will be useful because blah, blah, blah. But people just don't say that. So there's that experience of it as well, because of the way I come in with my own dispositions and so on. So yeah, I think we'll discover the different kinds of non-target contents and non-target purposes that people go to when they're going to that side of the plane, and have different purposes, serve different points. You know, purposes in the non-technical sense, they have different points to them. But you're dead right that it is definitely exotic. One of the first things that came up when I first created these ideas was that people kept saying that everything a teacher does is in order to teach the topic, if we use that as the target. So if we say the target is say history teaching for the purpose of for the students learning history, and I'd have people saying to me, oh, but when they do this, and when they do behavioral management, or when they do something that's a nice, you know, kind of like an engaging activity, or when they go off and they do an everyday example and an anecdote, then that's all for the purpose, the bigger purpose. And I say, yeah, but you're coding as you go. You're not you never code retrospectively. Oh, that's a point I have to remind myself. Times arrow goes only one way here. You may actually, like you do, go off or like the science teacher in the Taking Autonomy Tours paper, when she's doing maths, it may become evident that it serves the purpose overall, the target overall later on, but we don't retrospectively go back and code that. You know, we code as we are going, and the experience of those codes as we go, you know. So that otherwise we would just see everything would be in the sovereign code, or every teacher would claim everything's in the sovereign code, you know, because there's a purpose to everything I do, you know. And really, it's also, we have to remind ourselves that these tools are simply so that we can see change, that we can see difference, that we can see what's going on. You know, it's not about whether something is definitely exotic or not. It's just how is it relating to our particular things at this particular time. But I think you definitely are going to the exotic one.
Yeah, well, that's actually just made me think, though. One of the things that I then did, or we kind of concluded from the autonomy analysis, is the first step was to do exactly what Jo's doing, which is jump straight from sovereign into exotic. So you say what the whole session's about, but then you go and do something completely different. And what we were just talking about was you hate not knowing what the icebreaker's for, and me saying I've got a hidden meaning. And that's sort of the analysis we kind of then did, that actually maybe you don't want to jump straight into the exotic code. What you want to do is go via the projected codes and actually gives people some inkling as to why the icebreaker is going to make sense. Then they'll be with you. And so that actually suggests a slightly different tool that does an L-shaped rather than the jumping straight in.
No, you're dead right. The ones I really hate are where you literally start up in the exotic code, as far as I can tell. Because I don't know what the hell's the point of what we're doing here. I think there's a point because I've come along to something. And then when we start up in the exotic code with an icebreaker, I just think we're never getting back. That's my feeling, is we're never going to get to the target, you know? And that's been true in certain circumstances, and particularly in academic development at my university. Which is why I've never done any of it for the last 17 years. So, which is why I'm so terrible as a lecturer, probably, is that we never learned anything. We never got, we started with things like we'd have a room with different colors on all the walls, and you'd have to go over to one of them, and then you'd have to talk to the people there. And literally that would be about 3 hours or something, and then we'd leave. And I'd leave, So it's like, if you just start up in...
That's sad.
Well, it is sad, yeah, but that's the state of it when I began anyway, which would be you do these things and you never get to the point. So you're right. If you start up there and you never get back, or you start up there and people have experienced that in the past, you sometimes might want to consider just telling them why they're doing something. We're going to do this because of this reason. Trust me, we're going to get there. And I sometimes do that as well with anecdotes, because like that I'm using in teaching. I might say, I'm just going to tell you this anecdote, but there is a point to it, and we'll get there.
So it's
This
not
one,
just
I think we start
where the tools start that matter, where they start and end makes a difference.
This one, maybe we got people on board because we said, okay, let's first acknowledge, so that's our aim, but let's acknowledge I'm not in this room alone, doing it alone. I'm doing it with you. You came here for a reason. Let's acknowledge, this collaborative nature of that. Let's just see who's in the room. Let's just kind of get to know each other a bit more to see how we can work together. Maybe that was the starting point for that. Maybe that, and then I thought, okay, how about doing it later? Then I thought, no, later we're going to be deep in, evaluation, analysis, and all of that. There's no point to me. I think it would be very artificial. In this case, with those activities that are here now, that you can see, to go into that exotic at any other point other than the second short activity in this scenario. But I think, yeah, if people try to do it, already do it, other scenarios you've got would be absolutely fantastic to learn about. Just this conversation is so helpful. It's really great.
I don't think anybody's saying here is critical of you, Jo, because I think what we're doing is we're trying to figure out what kind of tools work, for what kind of pathways work for what kind of purposes. It's like the same with profiles. Semantic profiles, there's no one size fits all, like there's no one way of doing things. It really does depend on what you're trying to teach and what you're trying to achieve. And there are circumstances under which a flat line is exactly what you need. But they're not that often. And it's the same thing with pathways, that there may be, there even may be circumstances, where one-way trips are going to be useful. We just don't know. We have to try these things out and find out which ones are the best ways of doing things. And that's why the way in which, for example, the way in which yourself or Steve or Paul and others use these tools to say, for example, using self-reflection or analysis on others, where you say, well, this is what you wanted to achieve. We've analyzed it. We're showing you that it's this pathway. And if you really want to achieve your goals, you might consider moving a few things around or doing it in a different order or adding something in. And that's the purpose of this stuff, is to try and empower people to achieve what they want to achieve. We're never going to be telling them, this is the tour that you must do. Always. I was thinking about this today when I was noticing on Twitter, not calling it the name, how many times I see an adjective shoved in front of teaching as an approach. And I thought, why has that never been tempting to me? Because you say that all the time, like adaptive teaching, this teaching, that teaching. And it's because the sort of implicit notion here is that there is this one-size-fits-all thing. Even with the words adaptive teaching, I feel the chilling effect of a universal solution coming along, and we don't do that. We say, well, try out waves, try out tours, see what ones work for you. You know.
Something that's interesting that you were saying as well that just made me think more about this is the time you spend in each quadrant kind of matters as well. Not just the pathway, it's also what really mattered to make this work is not spending too much time in the explicit aims, not spending too much time in the icebreaker. You need to be there, but you don't want to take the whole thing as being that. But then that you did spend lots more time in the projected and introjected codes than actually in the sovereign code itself, because they, in this case, really set up making it easy to do the sovereign code quickly. Presumably, you didn't need as much time because you'd spent so much time in those other codes. So the amount of time you spend as you move around the path, clearly is something that's an issue as well, which I think is the case in what I was doing, but I hadn't thought about it quite so explicitly.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe I could visualize this better, on those slides. Yeah, nice sizes or something, but yeah, that's maybe coming. But time, I think, is very important. Also, who does what? How many times I was thinking, right, how much was I talking? I wasn't talking much at all, really, in that session. It was pretty collaborative. There was participants speaking most of the time, but maybe I could go back and kind of think, right, actually, the ratio, maybe would that help with anything, understanding it better? I spent, I think, considerable time maybe in activity 4 in analysis, kind of explaining what we were going to do, and sort of it's with the waves, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. But it would be still, me speaking would still be maybe 20% of the time, or even 10% of the time, versus 90% of the time the participants doing number 4 themselves, right? So, but I think
that's a great point, and that's another
well.
thing that we'll be exploring. Is how long and how interactive, and what kind of medium you're using, and that sort of stuff. All these things can be added in to explore. Everything can be added in to see whether it makes a difference. But I've just noticed the time, and we've already gone over. And I just want to say thank you so much, Jo, for what was a really great example of how these tools are tools for empowering people. And that's what they're for. They're not, we're not telling people what to do. They are just trying to bring things to our awareness, and then we can mindfully do things, or in my case, mindfully teach badly.